Imagine standing in a foxhole, the mud freezing around your boots, the air thick with the smell of cordite and diesel. Through the trembling earth, you hear it before you see it. The low, grinding mechanical growl of a Panzer V Tiger. It is 45 tons of hardened Krupp steel, a predator that eats infantry for breakfast. In your hands, you hold the standard-issue anti-tank rifle given to you by your government. It is heavy, it kicks like a mule, and against the monster approaching you, it is about as effective as a spitball against a battleship. You know you are going to die. But what if you knew that back at headquarters, sitting on a dusty shelf or tossed into a rejection bin, was a weapon that cost pennies to make, weighed almost nothing, and could have blown that tiger's tracks off in a heartbeat? This is the story of the simple, ugly, improvised grenade that the high command laughed at, while thousands of soldiers paid the price for that laughter in blood. To understand the magnitude of this failure, we have to look at the desperate reality of 1941 and 1942. The Second World War had evolved into a conflict defined by armor. The German blitzkrieg had shattered the old notions of static warfare. Tanks were faster, thicker, and deadlier than anyone had predicted. For the average infantryman on the ground, whether British, American, or Russian, the tank was the ultimate psychological terror. Tank fright was a genuine medical condition. Men would freeze, break, or run at the mere sound of squeaking tracks. The military leadership's solution to this problem was traditional, expensive, and catastrophically slow. They believed that the only way to kill a tank was with another tank or with a massive anti-tank gun towed by a truck. But the infantryman couldn't carry an artillery piece in his rucksack. He was given the boy's anti-tank rifle, a 55-pound bolt-action nightmare that could barely scratch the paint of a modern German Panzer. Or the Piat, a spring-loaded contraption that was heavy, awkward, and notoriously unreliable. These were over-engineered industrial solutions to a problem that required agility and raw explosive power. Enter the concept of the Gammon bomb or the No-82 grenade. It didn't look like a weapon of war. It looked like a piece of trash, and that was precisely why the top brass hated it. The design was almost insultingly simple. It was, in essence, a bag made of stockinette fabric elasticated cloth similar to a bandage or a sock attached to a simple impact fuse. That was it. There was no heavy steel casing. There was no complex fragmentation pattern. It was an empty bag. The genius lay in what the soldier put inside it. The user would fill the cloth bag with plastic explosive, usually composition C or Nobel 808. Because the bag was soft and malleable, the amount of explosive could be adjusted. You could pack a small amount for an anti-personnel grenade, or you could stuff 2 pounds of high explosive into it for an anti-tank roll. When the concept was first introduced, the reaction from the Ordnance Board was one of disdain. This was the British Army, an institution built on tradition, drill, and polished brass. They wanted weapons that looked like weapons. They wanted machined steel, rifled barrels, and precise engineering. The Gammon bomb looked like a sock filled with wet sand. It was deemed unsoldierly. It felt makeshift, something a partisan or a guerrilla fighter would use, not a professional soldier of His Majesty's Armed Forces. The rejection wasn't just aesthetic. It was bureaucratic. The High Command was obsessed with ballistics and range. They wanted to engage tanks at 500 yards. They couldn't understand that in the hedgerows of Normandy or the ruined streets of Stalingrad, combat happened at 5 yards. They dismissed the idea of a hand-thrown anti-tank mine because it required the soldier to get dangerously close to the enemy armor. They viewed it as a suicide weapon. What they failed to grasp was that the soldiers were already committing suicide trying to fight tigers with rifles. They were already close to the tanks. They just didn't have anything to kill them with. While the generals debated in comfortable offices, the infantry was being slaughtered. In North Africa, British troops watched 2-pounder shells bounce harmlessly off the hulls of Rommel's panzers. They were desperate. Reports came back from the front lines begging for something. Anything that a single man could carry and that could actually disable a vehicle. The brilliance of the ignored plastic explosive grenade lay in the physics of the squash head effect. When a standard metal-cased grenade hits a tank, it bounces off or explodes on the surface, sending shrapnel flying but doing little to the armor plate. But a soft bag of plastic explosive is different. When it hits the target, it doesn't bounce. It splats. It flattens against the steel like a piece of thrown clay before it detonates. This maximizes the surface area of the explosion in direct contact with the metal. The resulting shockwave is devastating. It doesn't need to pierce the armor. The shockwave travels through the steel and causes spalling on the inside razor-sharp flakes of metal that fly off the interior wall of the tank, turning the inside of the crew compartment into a blender. Furthermore, a 2-pound charge of plastic explosive placed on a tank track or an engine deck would instantly immobilize the vehicle. A tank that cannot move is a dead tank. This weapon cost a fraction of a PIAT or a bazooka. It could be manufactured by textile factories. It took up almost no space until it was primed. Yet, for the first crucial years of the war, it was sidelined. It was kept as a niche item, primarily for paratroopers and special forces who operated behind enemy lines and couldn't carry heavy guns. The regular infantry, the distinct majority of the fighting force, were denied access to it. Imagine the frustration of a platoon sergeant in 1942. He sees the effectiveness of plastic explosives used by commandos. He knows that if his men had these simple charges, they could turn every hedgerow into a tank trap. Instead, he has to order his men to fire useless lead slugs at 80mm frontal armor, revealing their positions only to be cut down by machine gun fire. The rejection of this simple technology also highlighted a massive disconnect in military doctrine, the underestimation of the individual soldier's courage. The high command assumed that soldiers wouldn't have the nerve to run up to a tank and throw a bag of explosives at it. They were wrong. History proved that soldiers would do exactly that, often with far less effective tools. The Russians were using dogs strapped with mines. The Japanese were using lunge mines on bamboo sticks. The British and American infantry were brave enough. They just weren't trusted with the tools to do the job. It wasn't until the airborne divisions, the paratroopers of the 101st, the 82nd, and the British 6th Airborne demonstrated the terrifying efficiency of the Gammon bomb on D-Day that the weapon gained grudging respect. In the chaos of Normandy, where supply lines were cut and heavy weapons were lost in the drop, these socks of death became legendary. Paratroopers destroyed armored cars, knocked out tanks, and leveled buildings with them. They called it hand artillery. There is a specific account of a paratrooper in the Bocage country who found himself cornered by a German Stoogie assault gun. He had no bazooka. He had no anti-tank support. He waited in a ditch until the vehicle rumbled past, stood up, and hurled a Gammon bomb onto the rear engine deck. The explosion was not a sharp crack, but a dull, thundering hammer blow. The engine block was shattered. The crew bailed out. A 60-ton threat was neutralized by 2 pounds of explosive in a piece of fabric. If this weapon had been mass-produced and distributed to every rifle squad in 1940 or 1941, the dynamic of the infantry war would have shifted. The German panzer divisions relied on speed and the intimidation of infantry. If every soldier in a foxhole had the capacity to blow a track off a tank, the panzer crews would have been forced to act with far more caution. The psychological advantage would have shifted from the tank to the foot soldier. But the bureaucracy of war is a slow, grinding machine. It favors contracts with large industrial conglomerates over simple field expedients. It favors complex, expensive systems that look good on paper over ugly, cheap solutions that work in the mud. The refusal to adopt simple plastic explosive grenades for the general infantry is a testament to a mindset that valued procedure over survival. Even the Americans, with their massive industrial capacity, fell into this trap. They relied heavily on the bazooka, which was an excellent weapon, but it was scarce, heavy, and required a 2-man team. The individual rifleman was left defenseless. The Hawkins mine was another example, a simple crush-fuse mine that could be thrown. It was effective, but rarely issued in sufficient numbers to regular troops until late in the war. They were always specialized equipment, never standard. Issue: the tragedy is measured in the letters sent home to grieving mothers. How many men died trying to get a clear shot with a heavy anti-tank rifle? How many were overrun because their defensive line had no answer to a single armored car? The cost of the Gammon bomb was roughly equivalent to a pair of boots. The cost of the tank it destroyed was tens of thousands of dollars. The cost of the soldier who died because he didn't have it was incalculable. In the end, the soldiers did what soldiers always do: they improvised. They stole explosives. They made their own satchel charges. They adapted. But they shouldn't have had to. The solution existed. It was rejected not because it failed physics, but because it failed the dress code. It was too simple for a complex war. As we look back at the technological marvels of World War II, the radar, the jet engines, the atomic bomb, we must also look at the failures. Not the failures of engineering, but the failures of imagination. The ignored simple weapon stands as a grim monument to the idea that sometimes the smartest people in the room are the ones furthest from the fight. And sometimes the most advanced weapon in the world is just a bag of explosives and the courage to throw it. The war was eventually won, but the graveyards of Europe are filled with men who might have lived if they high command had simply listened to the guys in the mud.